Microsoft's second announcement was the pricing of its new AI tool, Microsoft's 365 Copilot. As a part of Microsoft's productivity software, Copilot can summarize your emails or turn a Word doc into a PowerPoint presentation. Now, it won't be available to consumers at launch, but business customers paying for Microsoft 365 will have access to Copilot for an extra $30 per user per month. After that announcement, Microsoft rose 4%, reaching an all-time high and adding $154 billion in market value in just one day. Scott, your thoughts?
Satya Nadella is arguably the most successful venture capitalist in history.
Yeah.
So Satya made a $1 billion investment and then a $10 billion. Greatest VC investment arguably in history, maybe with the exception of Jack Ma investing, I think it was $50 million at Alibaba, and it turned out being 20 or 30 billion. Anyway, this is extraordinary. And what I would say is that, and this circles back to the writer's strike, Fran Drescher should be picketing outside of Redmond, Washington, not outside of Netflix or Paramount Studios. You got to get to the biggest pile of money. All the money being made here, where does AI get, what is the coal, what is the grist that goes into these LLMs? Other people's content. And there is no way that these models aren't scanning, digesting, and learning from a massive amount of content that these studios and these artists and these writers, even images, have been informed by makeup artists. I think that is absolutely the pile of money they need to be going after here. Think about this. Microsoft added the value of essentially Disney in one day. It added the value almost of Netflix. If you take out Disney and Netflix, Microsoft in one day added all of Hollywood, all of it and more. And so if they're benefiting, which I believe they are, from the incredible content, that's their focus. That should be their focus. They should join hands with Ted Sarandos. They should join arms with Ted Sarandos and Bob Iger, and they should march towards Redmond. That is the enemy here. That is the enemy. And so I remember I consulted or coached or advised, whatever you want to call it, Nike, Adidas, and Under Armour. And they'd all want to talk about gaining advantage against one another. I'm like, come on, you're competitors, but your enemy is also in Seattle, and it's called Amazon. And you should be presenting a united front against Amazon, not going after each other. Anyways, the numbers here are staggering. They're just staggering. When you think about where the money is, where the value is to be extracted, it's from technology. It's not from the studios. I think the WGA, the SGA, SAG-AFTRA, and all the studios should have their own technologists right now, finding the millions and billions of instances where this LLM, where this generative AI tool clearly was informed by the content and creativity of their members and their product. And they would claim, oh, it's fair use, or it's already out in the public domain. And I would hire the biggest, scariest lawyers in the world. I would start giving money to every politician and say, you have big tech eating our lunch, taking our lunch, borrowing our watch, and then telling us what time it is. And they need to stop. And I would be filing suits, and I would then come to some sort of accommodation with the deepest pocket in the world, and that is technology, and say, if you want to continue to crawl our content to inform your LLMs, which you are doing millions, if not billions of times a day, we have to come to some sort of agreement where if you can increase the value of your company by $154 billion in a day, we, the studios, and the creators, and the actors, and the makeup artists, and the gaffers, and the writers get to share in that. Because for Microsoft to give up, for Microsoft, Meta, OpenAI to give up a tiny portion of the incremental revenues and value they're going to create is much greater than, quite frankly, taking it hard to Bob Iger and David Zaslav. They're riper or more popular targets because it's easier to understand. But if they want to be effective versus right, and that's something I've struggled with my whole life, okay, they're right to complain about these studio heads making too much money. But okay, the top 10 actors make too much money too. You need to go after where your content is creating the most value such that you can extract some of that value. And by far, if you get a tiny slice of the value that tech is going to create off of your sweat and your creativity, you are going to end up in a much better place than if you imagine, than if you're able to extract a pound of flesh from the studios. You're in this together. You have picked the wrong enemy. You are Native American tribes warring against each other when the real enemy is the British or whoever it was who came in and performed, or Americans actually, genocide on Native Americans. You are fighting the wrong enemy. You're allies in this fight. You want to go after the deepest pocket in history, and that is the technology that is leveraging generative AI, who is crawling your content. This is your Google moment where I fucked up and the board of the New York Times fucked up. We were so enamored with Google that we let them crawl our data, and they gave us a nickel for every dollar they generated off of our journalism. Don't make that mistake again. This is that moment here and now.
It feels like the path that you're going down is sort of the data property rights path. And, you know, there have been a lot of legislative proposals in the past. The first one that comes to mind is the data dividend, which is the notion that tech companies use our data to train their models and to train their algorithms. And that's, quote unquote, our sweat that they're profiting off of. And therefore, we should get a slice of it as just general content creators. Would you take it that far? Do you think that that's where we're headed?
Well, the model here is in Australia. The Australian government said Facebook is where people are getting their news, but the people actually collecting the news and spending money on it and risking their lives sometimes to collect this news aren't getting compensated. Yeah. So they passed a law and said, okay, Meta, you've got to give a portion of your revenues generated in Australia back to journalists. And they huffed and puffed and threatened to leave Australia. Same thing's kind of going on in Canada right now. And they ended up paying them $150 million a year. Mm-hmm. And this is good for business. It's good for society because we need more journalists. And I think something similar should happen here. I don't know if it should be regulation. I'd like to think we can accomplish a private market solution through the right to assemble and the right to organize, which unions have. But, I mean, there's this giant sucking sound of relevance and capital from Hollywood to the Valley right now. Mm-hmm. And they need to get in the way of that airflow instead of warring with each other. But there's absolutely... If your stock goes up $154 billion in one day because you announced a subscription AI model, and you're informing that model, a little bit of that goes a long way towards paying your writers and your makeup artists.
Going back...
Let me run the union. Look for the union dog label. I'm ready. Learn from my mistakes.